I'm Enoch.
And I'm Isaac, and this is the What About Therapy podcast, where we talk about the what and the why behind all things therapy. Welcome today on our episode 100.
Guys, we did it. This is episode 100. I mean, technically it's episode like 134 or something like that, with all of our little series that we've done throughout it. But in the main series, we're at episode 100. Baby,
Welcome.
we made it.
You made it this far. If you've listened to all 100 episodes,
yeah, holy cow.
Then, I mean, I don't know.
Send me a DM on Instagram and I'll send you a virtual hug.
And we'll fly you out to us to meet us. I'm just kidding.
We'll fly you out to a meet and greet.
Just you. We'll go to get pizza or something.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
This is only my episode like 8 or something like that. So I just jumped on, but it's still awesome to be part of a podcast that's been around for so long. We're hoping to make these episodes as applicable as possible for you all. And today we want to talk about boundaries. We've talked a little bit about it in the past. Well, not me, but I know Enoch and Austin have. Mm-hmm. It's just something that I'm really passionate about right now, something that I'm trying to learn how to do better. And we hope that we can have a good discussion today about boundaries and in our relationships and how to set better boundaries, healthier boundaries.
Yeah. So first, let's talk about what a boundary is. Let me give you an example. So farmers or sheep herders put all of their sheep into this big old little fence. Now, some may say, oh my gosh, you're going to be hurting the sheep, or it's too cramped, or whatever. They need to be free. Well, listen, if they did not have those boundaries and the sheep could just roam free wherever they wanted, either they'd get lost or they would get eaten by a wolf or some other animal, Bigfoot out there.
He's real, by the way.
And so boundaries can be, one, physical, literally like that little fence that the sheepies are in. But they can also be emotional, spiritual, mental, a bunch of different kinds of boundaries. And boundaries at the end of the day are meant to keep you safe and meant to keep you healthy. When some people hear boundaries, they think of being strict and very rigid. But realize that these sheep, they get time to go out and roam free, but they also have little sheep herders that help them keep those boundaries when they're out roaming all about as well. So boundaries don't need to be rigid. They can be flexible, they can change, but we do need to have boundaries at the end of the day if we want to continue to stay safe and healthy.
Right. And there's lots of ways of staying safe, like physically safe, emotionally safe. Another boundary is like a time boundary, like work-life schedule. You got to find a boundary there.
Balance, yep.
And so we also in our lives, maybe not all of us, but I know people in my life, and it's not necessarily people that are evil people, but boundary predators. Predators sounds like a horrible word. So like, let's say boundary pushers, boundary destroyers. That's also pretty negative too.
Sounds like a basketball team or something.
Yeah, the boundary destroyers. But I think what I'm getting at here is these people are people that will see the fact that you can't really set boundaries and use that. That doesn't mean that they're an inherently bad person, right? Like they could be a good person, but just subconsciously kind of push more onto you than you can take. And everyone has different boundaries. So oftentimes people will test boundaries. So for example, if we have a boss that just loves to push boundaries and he just asks us every day to come in when we're not supposed to be working, and we're working, let's say we're on salary and we're working 60 hours a week. Yeah. Like that's pushing some boundaries. Yeah. That's something we need to learn to manage and realize, hey, this person's kind of pushing that boundary. I don't like how it's making me feel. And so what can I do to fix it? Like I said, maybe not all of us have these boundary pushers or predators in our life. I know that I have a couple, and they're not bad people. Like I said, it's just something you need to be aware of. Some people will push boundaries and others just won't push them as much.
Yeah. When you put a horse into a new fenced area, you'll see it run around the entire area. And what the horse is doing is testing its boundaries and see how far it can go, what it can do, can it jump over the fence, stuff like that. So in a way, everyone that you meet is a little horse. And they test these boundaries that you have. They go around all sides of the boundary to see like what they can do, if they can. Then, like Isaac said, this isn't going to be like a whole conscious thing. Like, how can I manipulate and use this person? The majority of people aren't going to be doing that, but they will learn to understand what your boundaries are.
Yeah. I'd say the professional little horses are teenagers. Super good at testing boundaries.
Just kids in general.
Yeah. Whenever someone new starts at the residential treatment center that I work at, we tell them, just be prepared. Kids are going to test you on like every boundary just to see how you react. And they won't do it consciously. It'll be subconscious, but they do it.
Right. See what they can do.
When I first started working there, I got destroyed like every day, insulted, pushed, like not physically, obviously, but pushed around emotionally, and them trying to see what I'll do to react, trying to see where my boundary is at, and learning what they can get away with. And that's just, teenagers are really good at that. Kids are really good at that. So technically they're boundary predators, boundary pushers, little horses. I think little horses is the better way of looking at it. We got the sheep. We got the horses. Let's call them little horses instead of boundary predators.
We'll make a shirt that says "little horse."
Yeah.
Or "don't be a little horse."
don't be a little horse. And so we want to point out a couple signs of weak or unhealthy boundaries. So as we go through this, maybe think of some times in your life or some aspects of your life that maybe you can relate to with unhealthy boundaries. Because I know I can. Every time I think about them, I'm like, oh my gosh, I definitely can work on that. For example, one way you can tell you have an unhealthy boundary is feeling really overwhelmed by others. So it usually means you're taking on too much or allowing them to push too much onto you, and you just really can't take it. So if you're feeling really overwhelmed from people or a certain relationship, usually that means you need to set more boundaries with that person.
Yeah. Or if you have difficulty saying no, if you're a people pleaser, we've done a full episode on people pleasing, and that could be you.
That is me a lot of the times, actually.
Yeah. And that's not like, if we like don't think these are bad things. They're not bad. They're unhelpful. Like it's not very helpful for your life to just say yes to everything, right? Because you may not want to do it, and so you don't have to. But you may be a people pleaser, and that's okay. But you can set a boundary. But if you have difficulty saying no, it's just a sign of unhealthy or some weak boundaries that you may have. Maybe your little fence that the horse is testing out is made of yarn, and it just it's there, but they just walk through it or step over it,
slide under it.
Yeah, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah. Another sign is allowing others to dictate your emotions. So kind of feeling like someone else can pretty much decide how you feel in that moment instead of feeling more in control of your emotions. I think, like Enoch was saying, this isn't something we'd hope you see in your life and you say, oh my gosh, I'm so bad for doing that. We would never want to promote like self-shame. It's just something, I think self-awareness is so important because it can help us, one, be humble and patient with ourselves, and also, two, grow and just become more healthy human beings, emotionally, physically, mentally.
Right.
And so we have like feeling overwhelmed by others, difficulty saying no, allowing others to dictate your emotions, just being aware of those and self-reflecting on situations in your life where you might feel that way is the first step to change. Oh. And so we have to point those out first. We also want to talk about some benefits. Enoch, you want to share some benefits of our healthy boundaries we can set?
Yeah, I mean, first, obviously, you got improved mental health. If you take the unhealthy boundaries and just flip them on the other side, you see that, one, you're not overwhelmed by others. Seems pretty great. And if you are overwhelmed by others, this can cause a lot of contention, may not build any healthy relationships out of that. So on the other side, you could have awesome relationships with great boundaries. You don't have difficulty saying no. So if someone asks you to do something and either you don't have the time, you don't have the bandwidth for it, whatever it is, you can say no, and that person will respect you for it. That's great. That's healthy. And then you don't allow other people to dictate your emotions. So, I mean, nothing too crazy. You can't be influenced by other people. And again, you just have more opportunities for growth and connection with other people when you do have stronger boundaries, even though it kind of feels like you won't. again, when we think of boundaries, we think of being a stick in the mud and just always saying no.
Right.
And just being lame, especially as parents, right? When we want to say yes, but we can't compromise the boundary, and so we say no, and we're just a big stick in the mud. We don't want to be that.
You want to be a cool parent. You want to be a cool friend, so you just say yes to everything, right?
Right. Yeah.
Another thing as well is you just learn to respect yourself more, to have higher self-esteem. That overall will help your mental health greatly and all your relationships. You're way more in control of your life and the way that you feel, and less influenced by others' negativity or emotions that they may try to pass on to you.
Yeah.
So some strategies to maintain good boundaries. One of them is clear communication. Clear communication, I mean, it's almost mentioned in every podcast that talks about relationships.
Yeah.
I'd say every episode that's brought up relationships, communication is one of the first things to bring up, to talk about, because it's so beneficial. Clear communication, learning to say no, that's very clear. Learning to say, okay, yes, I can help, and learning to just advocate for yourself is a very, very important skill to learn, especially as you get older and you see that a lot of people will test your boundaries and push you a little further sometimes if you don't just learn how to communicate how you feel.
Yeah.
I don't feel good about that. I don't really want to do that. And they can say why, and you can say, well, because this. You can actually share how you feel.
Yeah.
And that takes practice, but it's doable and it's important.
Yeah. Communication is a skill at the end of the day that all of us need to work on. And it's going to be really important, not only for setting boundaries, but for literally everything in your life. If you're good at communicating, then you'll be able to go and do basically anything you want in life, because you can communicate and you can talk with other people. Now, a key part of this is when we say, learning to say no, it's also how you say it. You can say no in a helpful way instead of just, no, get away from me, and being rude. And that's not going to be helpful for that relationship with that other person. And so learning to say, well, maybe I don't have the bandwidth right now to do that. I really would want to help you if I could, but I can't because blah, blah, blah.
Right. Instead of just because I said so.
Right.
That's always the worst response in any boundary.
Because I said.
Because I said. It's whoa.
Especially as a parent, we want to try and avoid that phrase.
Do not say because I said so. Explain why. And in any relationship too. No, I don't feel comfortable with that. Oh, why? Because this. Instead of just saying because I said no. Usually people want a reason behind something, and if it's a personal value, then obviously, hopefully that person, if they love you and care about you, wouldn't challenge that personal value.
Right.
And if they do, then that's a sign of an unhealthy relationship. If they hear about your boundary and the reason behind it and they push through it and try to keep pushing.
Yeah, there's something else going on there.
There's obviously more going on.
This is think back to the sheep analogy.
Not the horse one, the sheep
Not the horse. We're on sheep now. Oh, but I mean, even the horse, it's not really as applicable. But with sheep, if they see this, let's pretend you're a sheep, all right? Close your eyes, pretend you're a sheep. Bah.
I feel it. Shear me.
So you go into this gate, right? This little fenced area. And you say to the sheep herder, why is this here? This sucks. And the sheep herder just says, oh, because I say so. Oh. Well, that's lame. I'm going to try and get out. This sucks. If you explain it, if the sheep herder is like, well, I know it's not really the most comfortable in here with 1,000 of you in this 10 by 10 little area.
You're like, I can't breathe.
But it's here to protect you. So you don't run away and get lost, or you don't get eaten by these mountain lions or these wolves that are out here. Then you as the sheep will most likely respond in a different way, right? Rather than trying to retaliate and get out of this fence, you'll say, oh, I see the value in that fence. I'm going to stay in here. Thank you, sheep herder, for telling me why this is important.
Right. And I think healthy boundaries always come from a place of care, either self-care or care for someone else.
Yeah.
If you care for yourself, you can set these firm boundaries. And if you care for someone else, usually there's a reason you're holding the boundary, and it usually comes back to because I care about you, because I love you, and because I want to keep you safe, because I've experienced in that, and I know it leads to a very poor spot in life.
Yeah.
Just it's usually because you care for yourself or care for others. So your sheep herder cares about you. He cares about your safety. He wants you to be safe. He doesn't want you to go out and roam around because he wants you to be okay.
Right.
And so boundaries that come from a place of care are also very healthy boundaries.
Yeah. And if let's say you're a parent and you're setting boundaries for your kids, and you do it because you love them, and you explain them why the boundaries are there, that's all great. But then you may struggle with your own boundaries at work, right? We tend to switch the verbiage when we're talking about things for ourselves, like setting boundaries for ourselves may sound different than setting boundaries for our kids. We may say, we might struggle setting emotional boundaries or boundaries around the workload. And we may think, I have to take it on because I'm, either not important or I want to look good for this person, whatever it is. Just flip that on its head and say, I just talked to my kids or my little sheep about these boundaries, and I use this language. Use the same language with yourself. They're there to protect you, keep you safe, and overall, you'll be able to accomplish more when you have those boundaries.
Right. It's important to align your boundaries you set for yourself, and then the boundaries that you try to set for your relationships as well.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to talk about is this spectrum that we have here. So we have, at one end of the spectrum, we have relationships, just like a relational approach. And then on another end of the spectrum, we have boundaries. So this is like in our relationships, we have a relational approach and then we have a boundary approach. At the very far end, at the relational approach, we have the sure, whatever mentality, right? That doesn't really show much care. It's kind of whatever, do whatever. Usually you hear, I don't really care, go ahead and do whatever. So they don't care. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have super firm boundaries, and it's just no relationship. It's just no, because I said.
Yeah.
Why? Because I said.
Yeah.
That doesn't really show care either.
Yeah.
So if the reason isn't because I care, right, then why is the boundary there? What's the value behind it? There should be a value behind a boundary. And so we have to try to find the balance between the two. So you have to try to set the boundary, but also be relational. And usually that is coming from a place of care. I care about you, so I'm setting this boundary. And the reason behind it is this value. And so I'd hope that we can reflect on our relationships in our life and see, okay, maybe this, or honestly, failed relationships. I reflect back on my failed relationships a lot, in not a shameful, trying to hurt myself way, but in what was my approach like? Was it too relational? Was it too much just like a firm line of boundary? Like, where was my balance? And when we find that balance, we find that we can hold boundaries without feeling guilty, but also the person knows that we care about them and we love them. And so if someone knows that you care about them and love them, and you hold a boundary with them, and it comes from a place of care and love for yourself and for them, it's a very healthy relationship.
Right. Boundaries are essential. And yes, they're really hard to set, especially if you grew up in a place that had no boundaries. Mm-hmm. That can be really hard. And it can be a skill to set boundaries. And so if that is something you struggle with, then I strongly recommend going to see a therapist, going to see a professional. I would say buy our course on setting boundaries that we don't have.
Yeah, not yet. Be on the lookout, you guys, in the next 5 years. Sometime.
Yeah, no, that'd be cool though. We will have courses down the road. I'm actually right now working on a program for pornography addiction, so awesome. Be on the lookout. Do you have anything else you want to bring up?
No,
on boundaries?
I would just hope that today prompted some self-reflection. Like I always like to say, just understanding why you think a certain way, or being able to confess to something and just think about something and become aware of it is the first step to change. So once you become aware of something, try to change it. There's lots of ways you can do that. You can go see a professional. There's so many self-help books that can help as well, that can be life-changing as well. Yeah. Therapy is honestly the best thing ever. Enoch and I are very pro-therapy, so I'd recommend going to a therapist. But we hope you learned a little bit today about setting boundaries, and you can learn how to be relational in doing that.
Yeah. Danny D, episode 100. Take us out. Woo!
What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah. What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah. What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy?